Good morning. It's beautiful to be here with all of you, to be surrounded by so many dear friends, colleagues, new colleagues, for a conversation that is ongoing, but that hopefully today gets important nourishment and more voices, as well as more listening. I'm Paul Farber. I'm director and co-founder of Monument Lab, and while I stand up here at this pedestal, so to speak, I am here representing a collective of people, a group at Monument Lab, a lot of our collaborators, our partners, our families, our friends, and all of those who came before us to make this moment possible. I'm also standing here with a phrase that is our vision statement at Monument Lab, that's on the wall of our offices: monuments must change. Monuments do change. They change all the time. But I want to think about this phrase and put it out here to you in a talk about our work, about the state of monuments under the framework after permanence. So maybe we'll have more to talk through on that, Eric, as well. I want to thank Miranda and Melissa, of course, and make sure to give a special appreciation to you, Carrie Mae Weems. This is a moment where there are new energies around monuments, new listening, new resources, but this is a long-standing conversation. And for many of us in the field, including myself, I would not be where I am today without you asking your questions, without you putting out responses, making possible for so many of us to be agents in history and to think of art as a tool for transformation. So thank you. I do remember as a graduate student stumbling into the National Gallery of Art and seeing your work on the 54th Regiment and the Shaw Memorial in Boston, and realizing that we were allowed to talk back to monuments and have our own words and our own layers, and that's carried forward with me and with so many. So across the work that I do as a scholar or with my colleagues at Monument Lab, my goal is to envision and build a holistic form of remembrance that not only responds to history, but really seeks to repair and build connection. A way to look at the past, present, and future as not isolated on a linear time frame, but as circular, as mutually constitutive. And that's led me to some places that by no certain or at least solid plan have led to many detours that have been incredibly nourishing. That includes spending time in Berlin. I'm Jewish and queer, and I did not grow up dreaming of spending time in Berlin and was told actually to stay away. And you know, when people say stay away, what do? You sometimes draw toward. And it was finding the stories of Americans like Leonard Freed, Angela Davis, Audre Lorde, Keith Haring, and Paul Robeson, Langston Hughes, who found stories about American freedom and American division in especially Cold War Berlin that led to the writing of my first book. And with work with Monument Lab and leading up through our audit, you know, a lot of what we're thinking about is pushing past binaries that have been put out to us, that there are temporary and there are permanent monuments, that there are people who have power and there are people who do not, that our history belongs either isolated and frozen above us or behind museum glass. And what I have seen is a growing movement of artists, organizers, educators, you name it, people who are finding not just new voices, new possibilities, but they're finding one another in spaces just like this, and realizing that with power in numbers, we can actually ask questions of the symbols, sites, and systems that we've inherited. And there's great need to find our people. There's also great joy and great possibility. So I want to put out there the idea that there is no such thing as a permanent monument. Just like there's no such thing as permanent settlement or permanent solutions. monuments are kept up because of maintenance, money, and mindsets. And so what would happen if we imagined that the word permanence would disappear from our vernacular? I know it might throw off some curators with the permanent collections, right? And Lord knows, I get the longing for permanence. Whether I take out my phone, or I write in my journal, or I long to find connection across generations, I get it. And yet we know we're returning to dust, all of us. So what if you challenge yourself to not just push past the binary, the either or of temporary or permanent, but to think about what would you replace that word with? Enduring, generational. There are political leaders who think in Supreme Court justice lifetimes as their measure of impact. So how do we create communication across generations so you can stumble upon whether a statue, a site, a symbol, a valley, a street, as has been shared, and you can find connection in ways you didn't anticipate, but also how do you willfully make sure that you don't just put off the work of preservation, conservation, and connection to other generations and hope it works out. There is a way that I argue and thinking about and trying to write through this for my next book after Permanence, which I'm trying to work out here a little bit as we talk, so thank you for that. I believe that as the longer we value the ideal of permanence, we endanger our long-term survival. And that if we can move to different registers of time, whether that's deep time, whether that is term limits, whether that is work across generations that we have inherited and we are walking in the footsteps of those who came before us, we can also imagine those who come after us in more profound ways. This leads me to talk a bit about Monument Lab, which started as a classroom project. Myself and Ken Lum, I was finishing my dissertation about Americans and the Berlin Wall, and I kept bumping into pieces of the Berlin Wall in American public cities. And not just one or two, but like next to the fudge shop at the Space Needle in Seattle, or the subway station in Chicago, or the casino in Las Vegas. And I asked myself, why are these pieces here? But also, if they are here, what space are they taking up from others? And so Monument Lab began as a series of classroom experiments, and with a remarkable group of students and colleagues, we kind of entered into the public sphere. Monument Lab is fundamentally a socially engaged art project, and its form is a civic agency. And in the beginning, it was much more performative. I'm thinking about my dear colleagues, Hank Willis-Thomas and Eric Gottesman, and like how Four Freedoms came into being and their sibling spirit, which you show up and you hold ground and you find your people, and all of a sudden it can make something possible. Monument Lab is now a nonprofit organization. We have staff in Philadelphia, where we're based, New York, New Orleans, Texas, San Francisco, and we have collaborators across U.S. states, territories, and outside of our nation's borders. And I want to be really clear that while if I say the word monument, there's something that comes to your mind, but there is no definition of a monument. There is nothing inherently that is a monument, that's born into the world as monument. There are things that are resourced as monuments, spotlighted as monuments, called monuments, referred to as monuments. For far too long, that void of definition was occupied by people with profound power who wanted to reinforce their own power and presence, especially to reinforce racist ideology and apartheid in America. The flip side also has been emerging over more than a generation, which is if you don't have the time, the money, and the power to build, or official power, you have power nonetheless. You build your own monument, or you gather around ones that exist, and that's how you amplify. Which is why Monument Lab came up with a definition for monument. Monuments are statements of power and presence in public. I think my day job in many ways is like an ad hoc global monument ambassador, and it has led to really profound conversations, whether it's with colleagues around this country, across tribal nations, with colleagues in Ukraine, in South Africa. There is a hunger for some kind of connection where we can respect our local knowledge and expertise, but build coalitions across locations. In our work, we build prototype monuments with artists like this. The Battle is Joined by Karen Olivier. And we are increasingly doing enduring commissions. I'm not going to use that P word, but working with colleges, universities, and civic partners to build capital projects that are meant to last a generation, if not multiple. We like to theorize public space while in public space. We've set up shop in shipping containers, under tents on the National Mall, library pavilions, museums. We like to hire young people, artists, educators, to do the work they're already doing, which is asking questions in public space about the monuments we've inherited and our landscapes. And then we always want to be learning. At the center of all of our projects is a question. It's a question that's not meant to have a single answer, but a multitude of possibilities. We have an amazing research team led by Sue Mobley and led by earlier cases, Lori Allen. And we love to think about data, but we're also really interested in the gaps. What isn't told? How is knowledge shaped? Knowledge, like beauty, can't exist in isolation. It must exist in relation. So we also like doing handwritten data. The messiness, leave the fingerprints on it. And we've done this across the country where we utilize a paper form with a simple prompt as a way to open up ideation and possibility. As noted, we're in a moment of reckoning and reimagining in this country, but it's not new. It's as old as the country itself. Here, a really transformative collaboration we did with the artist Hank Willis Thomas in Philadelphia, All Power to All People, that has multiplied beautifully across this country and this world. I saw another version of this in Cape Town, South Africa earlier this year. We are in a moment where we're simultaneously dealing with a profound repression against the telling of history and a reimagining of the tools that we have, and both things are happening at once. And I think it's important for us to make sure that we not only deal with the realities of profound pushback, but we also try to look out for the people who are holding us up and the people who will get us through. I'm going to share two projects that Monument Lab has been working on that kind of go at different frames. And of course, both would not be possible without the support of the Mellon Foundation. Thanks to Julie, thanks to Dr. Elizabeth Alexander and the whole team. This is a sub-granting project called Regeneration. We did an open call, our first open call several years ago. We just closed one that just came in with people who are leading commemorative campaigns in their own cities, towns, regions. And what we heard, if you're wondering, like, what do we do with the future of our monument landscape? Well, just ask people. They're doing the work already. These are intergenerational, intersectional teams from the areas of Rapid City, Dineta, which is in the Four Corners, Montgomery, Alabama, Philadelphia. Some people are building new sites and statues and plaques, but there are walking trails, there are curricula, there are poetry gatherings and retreats of Black women and femme poets. Our monuments not only will not look the same if they are going to be truly liberatory and transformative, but the process matters as much as the outcome. What is beautiful about these projects, and hopefully the next set, which our team is currently reading through hundreds of applications that have come in, is that there is great hunger for this work, and there's great vision that's already out there. Whether that is the stories of interracial solidarity in West Virginia, in coal country, or the building up of new sites in Montgomery, Alabama, that contest legacies of enslavement and brutality against Black women in the name of medical innovation. What we've seen across this work is that there is not only the need for healing, the need to contend with our country, which is bursting at the seams with grief, holding on to the myth of a past, but that there's great joy in regeneration and in finding your people. We just completed a project also supported by the Mellon Foundation in partnership with the National Park Service, the National Capital Planning Commission, the Trust for the National Mall. A very different project, but one that carries through for us, which was called Beyond Granite Pulling Together. And it was co-curated by myself and Salamisha Tillett, a dear friend and mentor. And this was another project that thought about respecting local knowledge and expertise, but building coalitions across locations, but really thinking about the National Mall. The National Mall as a site that we now think of as equaling monumentality, but the area that we now call the National Mall in the nation's capital was a river, cleared and steered to create plantations as a compromise between free and enslaving states, which led to rambles and statues popped up here and there, but a plan really instituted in the early 20th century to create a monumental core. We've had the opportunity to go under the Lincoln Memorial. They're building a visitor center there. And I will tell you, there's a dirt floor. And I naively asked our park ranger tour, I said, "What tour guide?" I said, "Did you all bring in the dirt? What's going on?" He looked at me and he said, "This is the riverbed of the Potomac. That's at 0 sea level. That will return to the sea one day. But it is there to look like it's been there forever." And for this project, what we wanted to do is, of course, think about the monuments that were there and installed and our great icons, but really think about the monumental moments in American history. Marian Anderson in 1939, desegregating the Lincoln Memorial and the National Mall because of racist exclusion at the Daughters of the American Revolution. The March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, the AIDS quilt in 1987. These moments where the mall is not prescribed by stone, marble, or public policy, but by people and by artists, and especially those who are balancing the presence and absence of those of our people. This was a project that we would have loved to have like 3 or 4 years to cook up and cultivate, but we got a window. They said, "Can you do it in a year?" And we said, "Let's do it." So I want to share a bit about the artists that we're able to work with. I should go back one and just say the question that fueled this project was, what stories remain untold on the National Mall? And what we wanted to do in that, we know stories are not merely untold, they may be under-resourced, underlooked at, but we wanted to use that as a question to open up, to ask artists, to ask the millions of people who come to the mall, and to think about the National Mall as itself in flux and becoming. Vanessa German had to carry a big weight of the show. She was on the plaza by the Lincoln Memorial, but we asked her to interpret the story of Marian Anderson. And what Vanessa German, a brilliant artist who is an empath, who's a visionary at her work, what she wanted to do was both uplift Marian and put in context the crowd that was there in 1939. And to include her historic photographs on pedestal, to bring in different symbols and sites that really also protect Marian, inspired by Gullah Geechee traditions with the blue bottles to ward off evil spirits. And as part of her work, she did a public program, and I'm going to share a short video produced by our colleagues at the Mellon Foundation.
What stories do we present as a part of our national volume that we can attach ourselves to and be proud to? This is a submerged story. My name is Vanessa German, and I am a sculptor. The flowers are a natural wonder of this world, as Marian was a natural wonder of this world, and they only grow in Africa. And rising to the blue bottles, the color blue in my spiritual tradition is literally a gift from God. None of us really know what it took for her to be who she was. So the musical notes that trim her gown is the musical notes to Nobody Knows the Trouble I've Seen. Rising up through the center of the cube reflecting the living life of the day. This is a moment where we became an incarnation of who we want to be.
This is a project that lasted 30 days on the mall. It might be the shortest exhibition we worked on, but it is the longest event of its time on the mall. And you think about, there are about 1,000 permitted First Amendment events every year. They get a matter of hours, if you're lucky, right? A matter of hours, maybe a day. Smithsonian Folklife Festival is there for up to a week. We had to work with every tool we had, with building coalitions, with the Park Service, with all of our partners to figure out how to get there, and by the way, how to touch the grass. Because I will tell you, there's a 60-page turf manual with photosynthesis rules. So, the artist's job was to envision, and ours was to help them envision. And by the end, we figured out a way to add new stories to the mall. One of the questions I know we often get is like, well, it was temporary. What does that mean? Well, I will tell you, not only is Vanessa German's artwork going to other places, including the Frick Collection in Pittsburgh, but the photographs of this installation will be carried by Park Service rangers who say Marian Anderson's name every day on the mall, but will now use it as a reference point. Another work by the artist Paul Ramirez-Jonas underscores the goal for monuments to be participatory. Paul Ramirez-Jonas is an artist who's been long thinking about monuments and long thinking about monuments that can't be finished until people activate them. And he noted that Marian Anderson sang My Country 'Tis of Thee, a song that had already been adapted from its colonial imperial roots, and remixed the song. And that Dr. King, in his I Have a Dream speech, remixed the song. And when Aretha Franklin sang the song for the Obama inauguration, put her own take on it. And so he created a bell carillon that played every note of My Country 'Tis of Thee except the last note, a missing note. The missing note was held below in a large monumental bell made in a foundry in Richmond, Virginia, with the idea that you finish it. He wanted this to be an analog to democracy, that we've inherited the past in bits and spouts, but how do we activate it? And I will say that seeing people of all ages ring the bell, and I come from Philly, we have a famous bell that we're not allowed to touch. And to see the simple joy of being able to participate is something that is sadly missing from our monument landscape. And this work will travel to several sites as well. I want to pull up Wendy Red Star's The Soil You See. Wendy Red Star is Crow, Apsaloga, and is an artist who from the very beginning knew exactly what she wanted to do. She wanted to have a piece that was comprised of granite rock, of glass, with the idea that from granite comes sand, from sand comes glass, from glass comes light. It was placed on an island dedicated in the 1980s to the 56 signers of the Declaration of Independence, over 40 of which were enslavers. But their signatures are all on this island. And what she did, and you can see this work online, I'm glad to share other images to you if you're interested, is this is her fingerprint, and on the ridges of her fingerprint are the names of Crow, Apsaloga tribal leaders who signed treaties with the US government that were not honored, many of whom are tribal representatives who went to DC to declare their own rights to their own land. And to see this work juxtaposed right next to this founding story, it is inserting that gap, that both of this exist. If we are to value the true telling of history, we need all of it. Each of the artists, all 6 of them, Derek Adams, Tiffany Chung, Sean Crawley, and the 3, Vanessa German, Paul Ramirez-Jonas, and Wendy Red Star, were given a tall task. Work with a space that people think they know and open it up for possibility. I have seen out of this profound joy, profound possibility, tears of pain, like all the emojis, all the emotions. There's also now policy on the National Mall for temporary art to exist. There is new innovations being sought after. But I think most of all, I want to remind us, no matter how powerful this work is, its true testament, its lasting staying power will be in what comes forward. And seeing hundreds of people share their own responses to the question of what stories remain untold on the National Mall was profound. And I hope it will inform not just the future of this program in the nation's capital, but I know it will continue to inform Monument Lab's work. I'm going to close in a moment, and I want to put out a few thoughts as I do. And I think this is a great opportunity for a lot of us who have been in this conversation for a long time, those who are newer, to really think about that question of what comes next. And I want to put out several statements that are definitely not to be written in stone, but to be carried forward and to think through them. That the future of monuments is radically collective. The future of monuments holds space for all of our ancestors. The future of monuments reflect peace in place of war. The future of monuments knows no borders. The future of monuments speaks truth to power, and that the future of monuments is changing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm a huge fan of the Monument Lab's work, and I actually just submitted to the open call as well.
Okay.
I do, just from all your experience working with these artists, to me, like, there's always a paradox about monuments, is that you either, like, you know, do something for the community where, like, we share this, like, love and care, and it's like, you're heard, we're together, or there's, like, you know, the other type of monument that puts up a protest and a fight against, you know, the other group, the other half of the nation that might speak a very different language, have very different logic. And in that process, it's almost like you have to rip your wound open and, you know, harm yourself to be able to, like, fight that fight. And I wonder, like in providing comfort and putting up a fight that eventually, you know, might, you know, you have to relive your trauma to fight the fight and speak for yourself. Where is monument, like, do you think is there a monument that can do both? Or do you think, like, where's the limitation of each one, and if they can work together in a way that we can fight our fight without hurting ourselves?
Yeah, thank you for that incredibly thoughtful question. I feel like we could spend a full convening on it because you gave us so much, but I want to try to give a few notes to it. I will tell you, you know, monuments are my life's work, and I'm profoundly ambivalent about monuments. And I don't mean ambivalent like wishy-washy. I mean torn, because I believe that when you encounter a symbol and you see yourself or you see something inspiring, it can be catalytic, it can be profound. And at the same time, I don't think the monument will save us alone. In fact, no monument is in isolation. I think sometimes, you know, I really appreciate the framing of this convening, monumental concerns. And again, highlighting that there is no one definition of monument. But I think also there's no monument that's in isolation from its broader landscape. And that includes every other piece of public art, architecture, the way that people traffic around it. But also every monument itself is a consolidation of a particular story that leaves out so many others. You know, I think about the great work of Michel Roth-Trouillot, who called an archive a bundle of silences. And I would say monuments are doing the same thing. So I think what you're talking about, as I understand it, and I want to do justice to it briefly, is the multiplicity that is the same of the American experiment, if not other places in this world, whether we're talking about democracy or other systems of governance, where we have reasons to be joyful and we have reasons to be sorrowful. We have traumas and wounds from the past that not only persist, but we don't invest time, money, and energy into responding to them. And it's like, you know, it's disavowing, like, nope, we're not gonna care about it. And then you're like, why is your arm in a spasm? Well, you're pushing so hard to get it away. So my hope would be that there are monuments or monument projects or monument collectives that make space for, whether in the built installation or the process, moments to have grief and loss expressed and not suppressed. And then there's other moments for joy. I think, you know, and even seeing in the presentation, Julie, you shared, like, the story of COVID and hearing the presence of music and drums at a moment of mourning. Many cultures that go through grief that I've encountered mix moments of solemn reflection with catharsis, whether through music, through food, through honoring, and there's a time for all of it. So I think maybe we cannot ask our monuments to fix all our problems. Like, I believe profoundly in the transformative power of art, and I constantly want to set a parameter when I'm dealing with a municipality or university, say, like, the artist is not going to take away your problem, that's on you, what the art can do, and artists who are given the proper time, space, and resources can help us get to the multiplicity of our feelings and the multiplicity of experiences that make up any given place. Thank you.
Well, I just want to follow up on this idea of permanence, which I find very interesting. So if you get rid of the idea of permanence, then commemoration, memory, and honor really become, part of a process of creating culture. Mm-hmm. And I think that the removal of and the rethinking of monuments over the past few years has really been one of the more progressive, movements in recent memory. So if creating, monuments and commemoration is really a process, then how do you connect, the progressive actions of rethinking monuments to a sort of a larger national conversation about democracy and culture, which is certainly going in the opposite direction?
Yeah. Thank you for that question, and it brings up a few things for me. I think that in doing this work, and especially through the experience of the audit and working with our colleagues at Mellon, we wanted to ask a question of what is the monument landscape we've inherited? And we had no idea how fragmented the landscape was and also how deep the problems were. And that's after studying and engaging this work for years. And doing so under the framework of a kind of progressive mindset and coalitions. And just to say, one is you would imagine there must be some agency out there that's been in charge of all the monuments, that you could petition them to get rid of a toxic one or ask them to put it up. If you read newspapers or hear other media accounts, it sounds like there's someone there. And let me tell you, we have inherited a hodgepodge. You ever open the drawer? I often say this, open a drawer, try to find one wire, and every wire you've ever owned comes out. Magnify that infinitely, right? And so what we have is a collection of things that we call monuments now that are federal, state, local, tribal, institutional, and there's no clear way to discern them. But what goes along with that is that means that the way that those symbols and sites have gained resources over time have been those who have access to time, money, and official power. And in finding out in our audit, for example, that we looked at 500,000 records. We had a study set of nearly 50,000 across every U.S. state, territory, numerous tribal nations, that 1% of Civil War monuments mention slavery. So Civil War was fought over slavery, full stop. And 1%, so that means in the title, in the plaque, or maybe in the metadata that a record keeper put. 3% of Confederate monuments mention the word defeat. And just anecdotally, I can tell you of the words like statesman, loyal, patriot that appear on them. So I think about that, and then I also think about the fact that in our audit, despite an important focus that many of us have on the empty pedestal and the toppled monument, our audit showed that over 99% of monuments were not toppled or removed in 2020 and 2021. So we're actually talking about a landscape that's largely still there. All of which to say, I think that this requires a deep gut check for where we put energy, time, and resources. And I want us to understand how we shape coalitions that make, it is profound. It's profound when a new monument is brought into the world or a toxic one is removed. I've seen it be catalytic. I've seen it inspire new collectives, new organizations, scholarships, you name it. And that is right in certain cases. And if we don't respond to the lies and erasures, we're going to keep navigating through the same issues. And that's true of our monuments as well as our political systems. Because the Electoral College is the ultimate monument, to toxic power. And how do we get toward that? Well, art can hopefully get us closer to those possibilities, or at least give us some nourishment along the way. Thank you.